Welcome to Newsbeat, an unconventional examination of conventional wisdom. Newsbeat is an MP Studios production, a division of Maury Publishing. Newsbeat. Listen, learn. Today on Newsbeat. Every year on the third Monday in January, the nation remembers Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the revolutionary minister and advocate for nonviolent protest, who became the voice and face of the struggle for civil rights in America. The days surrounding the now federal holiday are marked with municipal observances, mass media programming, and lesson plans in the nation's schools, all surrounding the central theme of I Have a Dream, an excerpt from Dr. King's speech in 1963 from the March on Washington.
I have a dream.
Now it's time for the breakdown.
I have a dream. I have a dream.
I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare.
Roger C. Williams, pastor, First Baptist Church.
As the pastor of a Baptist church, I'm often pressed into service by local officials to participate in a day of remembrance for the late Dr. King. Invariably, the day's events invoke the most famous of his words.
I have a dream.
It seems the entire legacy of this man has been distilled into these 4 words, packaged and spoon-fed to the public. But this was merely a moment in time in an evolution of thought. It in no way embodies the complexities of the man or the movements he inspired. And we're doing a disservice to our children by striking a single note over and over again, expecting them to hear the entire symphony. If we want to truly honor the legacy and works of Dr. King, we must certainly acknowledge the March on Washington as a high point in the civil rights movement, as it precipitated the passage of some important reforms in our nation. Increasingly, however, Dr. King became disillusioned with the political process and what he saw as an organized effort to marginalize people of color around the world and to pit the working class against itself by provoking racial discord. The former is illustrated by his vehement and unpopular opposition to the Vietnam War. The latter can be explained by what is known as the Southern Strategy.
I have a dream.
This was merely a moment in time in an evolution of thought.
Essentially, by the end of his life, Dr. King was speaking more often about the tendencies of America to combat communism, but only aggressively so against nations of brown people. The government responded in kind by branding him a communist, extensively surveilling him and attempting to blackmail him. He was also vocal about economic issues and what he believed to be an assault on poor people, instead of poverty itself, and a subversive campaign to turn members of the white working class population against black workers, particularly in the South. In fact, the last movement he was to carry forth was called the Poor People's Campaign. This, he believed, would truly be his legacy. More than likely, it was this that got him killed.
Dr. King, in his own words.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Now, this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
True legacy. The movement, the memory, epitome of truth, the power, they couldn't let him be. Statues now, before it was an effigy. The end of Jim Crow, enter the SCLC. Non-violent, but nothing close to timid. Master of the boycott, protest, and sit-ins. A noble man who even won the Peace Prize. Yet they threw him in the cell almost 30 times. 3 letters and you know who it is. They try to boil him down in just 4 words. Too simplistic, they hunted him down, labeled him a communist. Now they applaud after they whitewashed it. A champion, a man for all people. Uncle Sam ain't want him to branch out. He reached too far and he pushed too hard. A red alert, so they did what empires do and killed the messenger.
Again, Reverend Roger C. Williams.
Ultimately, I think what scared the establishment was Dr. King connecting the dots, that economic mobility equated to political power. After the March on Washington, he began to transcend issues of racism and social justice, which were boxes those in power allowed him to fill. Once he broke out of these boxes and began to attack the very underpinnings of the capitalist structure and the military-industrial complex, it was almost as though he broke the rules of engagement.
We are coming to get our check.
And so, over time, there seems to have been a deliberate effort to stuff Dr. King back into these more comfortable boxes and whitewash history. One of the first things you do when rewriting history is to find a convenient foil or anti-hero. Malcolm X, for example, is largely portrayed as the militant black activist who didn't see eye to eye with Dr. King's nonviolent movement. And so, as a nation, we celebrate King and approach Malcolm X with extreme caution. While there is an element of truth to this characterization, at certain periods, it's reductive in nature. The fact of the matter is that both men began to recognize a coordinated effort on behalf of our government to oppress poor and working class Americans and create a culture of fear and distrust along racial lines. The second important step to rewriting history is to narrow things down to slogans and epitaphs, something ephemeral that evokes emotion, yet can fit on a bumper sticker. I have a dream. A lifetime of agitation, heartbreak, and protest reduced to 4 simple words that neither inform or offend. The NEA, for example, offers national guidelines on how to teach children about the life and times of Dr. King. It's as though he finished that speech and simply disappeared from public life, only to be shot and killed after 5 years of silence. The lesson plans show our teachers how to speak to children about nonviolence and passivity and the importance of the marches and boycotts in Selma and Montgomery. They listen to sections of I Have a Dream, and that's basically it. They even have a link to the rap video from Common called A Dream, which is supposed to connect young people today through hip-hop. But even this video is the perfect example of whitewashing history, because it's the title song and music video to a movie called Freedom Writers, where Hilary Swank, the white savior teacher, finds herself assigned to an inner city class full of troubled ethnic teens. It's a typical, well-meaning Hollywood liberal portrayal of the white man, or woman in this case, who saves the day by inspiring kids to reach beyond their circumstances and make something of themselves.
They are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
Like most important figures throughout history, there was so much more to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. than is portrayed in the media and in the classroom. He was a flawed man and a complicated figure who evolved over his lifetime, made many sacrifices and compromises on the way to his many achievements. It's tempting, I suppose, to allow history to view him through a simplistic but noble lens and just leave it at that. After all, part of the prepackaged and sold legacy is that he was indeed a moral and transcendent figure who fought the good fight on the right side of history. But to truly honor him, I believe we need to be honest about his personal struggles and the times he chose to question the very movement he helped shape. Toward the very end of his life, in fact, just the night before he was killed, an increasingly paranoid and fragile king delivered one of the other most notable addresses in his life.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
When he delivers that final line, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," he turns abruptly and retreats from the stage. In retrospect, the moment is made even more powerful knowing these would be his final public words, as though he knew what was to come, maybe even when. He was assassinated the next day. In the end, Dr. King's legacy should be one that speaks to all people. The monolithic portrayal of him as a crusader for social and racial justice diminishes the more revolutionary aspect of his leadership. In many ways, we're only beginning to wrap our minds around the language he was using in the 60s. When he said, "This country has socialism for the rich, rugged individualism for the poor," it may as well be Bernie Sanders out there campaigning. You see, the brilliance of Dr. King was his ability to see the entire picture, a spectrum of issues that were interwoven within a capitalist system designed to separate working people from economic power. As much as we would like to paint him as the patron saint of nonviolent action against institutional racism, Dr. King was, in reality, a radical and revolutionary voice cut down for challenging systemic oppression.
Yeah, a true legacy. The movement, the memory, epitome of truth, the power, they couldn't let him be. Statues now, before it was an effigy. The end of Jim Crow, enter the SCLC. Non-violent, but nothing close to timid. Master of the boycott, protest, and sit-ins. A noble man who even won the Peace Prize. Yet they threw him in the cell almost 30 times. 3 letters and you know who it is. They try to boil him down in just 4 words. Too simplistic, they hunted him down, labeled him a communist. Now they applaud after they whitewashed it. A champion, a man for all people. Uncle Sam ain't want him to branch out. He reached too far and he pushed too hard. A red alert, so they did what empires do and killed the messenger.
Now it's time for the upshot. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has received myriad posthumous awards in his honor. During his lifetime, Time magazine recognized Dr. King as its Man of the Year in 1963. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. King was indeed extensively surveilled by Hoover's office, but it has been revealed that the wiretappings of King's offices and home were at the behest of the White House, beginning with John F. Kennedy Jr. and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The Johnson administration continued the practice with the president himself taking a keen personal interest in the tapes. Each administration, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson, regarded King with extreme caution and a useful ally at times. It wasn't until King began to vocally oppose the war in Vietnam that he fell permanently out of favor with the White House. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered on the balcony outside his room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, on April 4, 1964. In the pandemonium that ensued, James Earl Ray, an escaped fugitive staying in a boarding house near the Lorraine, was accused of firing the lethal shot. Ray initially confessed to the shooting, then withdrew his confession soon thereafter. He maintained his innocence until his death in 1998. In 1999, a jury in a civil trial awarded the King family $100 in a decision that refuted the claim that Ray had acted alone. A key witness testified that King's assassination was part of a larger conspiracy to silence King's opposition to the war and organization of the Poor People's Campaign. The Justice Department declined to reopen the case after this verdict, and the decision was never appealed. On November 2, 1983, President Ronald Reagan declared the third Monday in January a national holiday in King's honor. Newsbeat is an MP Studios production, a division of Maury Publishing. Visit MauryPublishing.com to learn more about our services. Subscribe to this podcast to receive notifications of new shows. Newsbeat is produced by Manny Faces. Original music supervision by Eden White. The executive producer of Newsbeat is Jed Maury. Newsbeat. Listen. Learn.